Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Politics Today, and I'm your host, Khalid Butt, and we're going to discuss a very important issue concerning one of our neighbors, that is Afghanistan. Sunday was the day that the fourth presidential elections were held in Afghanistan. As you know, that three other rounds of elections have been held in the past. Hamid Karzai Saab was elected president in the first two rounds. In the third, Ashraf Ghani Saab was elected. And in the third round that was held in 2014, there was some kind of controversy between him and Abdullah Abdullah, the power sharing, due to which, of course, John Kerry then mediated, and Abdullah Abdullah was made chief executive, and Ashraf Ghani Saab was made the president of Afghanistan. And now there is another round of presidential elections that has gone on Sunday. The amount of voters, registered voters, is 9.6 million. 15 candidates were present as far as this poll for president is concerned. The number of people who voted was around 35%. Women also voted, but despite that, even the day of the elections, there were around 4 people who were killed, around 80 who were injured. But the determination in the Afghan people still remains that they want to participate in these presidential elections. The main, of course, three candidates, if I can say, is Abdullah Abdullah, and there are two other candidates who we will be talking about during the course of the show. Who are these candidates? We'll divulge that to you in a few short moments. But before we do that, let me introduce to you my three guests who are experts as far as Afghanistan is concerned. On my very right is Ambassador Asif Durrani. You're a former ambassador. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us.
Thank you for having me.
Our second guest is an analyst, an anchor person for PTV World. You do a show called Dialogue for PTV World. Thank you very much, Taimur Shamil, to have joined us. And our third guest is Dr. Manzoor Afridi. You're a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. We'll begin with you, Asif Durrani Saab. Asif Durrani Saab, fourth presidential elections. Two were, of course, in which Hamid Karzai became president. Third, Ashraf Ghani Saab, power sharing with Abdullah Abdullah, and now there's a fourth round. Who are the three main candidates in this round of presidential elections?
Well, as you know, President Ashraf Ghani is the front runner, and then followed by Mr. Abdullah Abdullah, who has been the chief executive, and the third one is Mr. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar of the Hizb Islami. They are the three main candidates in this elections. But as you said that the turnout was 35%. That has been the official figures. But independent sources still say that out of 9.6 million voters, there are controversial figures.
All right.
Yes. One says that 1.1 million people cast their vote, and other says 2.1 million. In either case, if it's 1.1 million, then it's hardly maybe 11, 12, 13%. But if it is 2.1 million, then you can
What
say
is
it's
the reason
about
for that,
22,
Asif Durrani
23%.
Saab? What is the reason for this low turnout? Are people
Well,
afraid?
definitely.
Are there
Yes.
other reasons for that?
Definitely, there was a fear of Taliban backlash. They already did that during the election campaign, even during Mr. Ashraf Ghani's election campaign. There have been many suicide attacks. Many people were killed. And before that, there was again a fear psychosis with the people, and they feared that there would be much more bloodbath during the election. And already Taliban had threatened that they would not allow these elections to succeed. But having said that, I think holding of this election has been a big event, there's no doubt. And then it has been a challenge to Taliban. Despite the threat, the people came out, they voted, even if the turnout was very less. And it shows that the Afghan society is quite polarized, and there are dividing lines between Taliban and the rest, who may not agree with the Taliban line of thinking. So, and this is all the more necessary that then there's a need for reconciliation. And sooner this reconciliation takes place between the United States and the Taliban, who are the major stakeholders, the better it would be for Afghanistan. and for the peace and stability of the country.
All right, Taimur, reconciliation is something that Ambassador Saab pointed out. When we talk of reconciliation, how can we not talk about the peace talks that were happening since a couple of months and now they have been stalled, as per this tweet of the US President Donald Trump. How important were those talks for this reconciliation and, of course, the participation of people in the elections and the future of a political stability in Afghanistan? And how do you foresee now political stability now that, as ambassadors have also pointed out, the Taliban had issued clear threats for people who wanted to participate in the elections or vote, and repercussions, and of course we won't know the results till a couple of weeks, but how is it going to kind of pan out in the long run?
Very important question, Umar. I guess the context and I think the timing of this election is very important, as Ambassador Durrani just said, that Taliban, the peace talks were called off by the President Trump. Interestingly, the timing of inviting the Taliban to Camp David was also very, I would say, questionable. Just before 9/11, him calling Taliban in Camp David, I think it wouldn't have been that well received back in the United States. Since he has called off the peace talks, the prospects for elections, presidential elections, became bright in Afghanistan. I think the most important question is that if democracy, such kind of democracy, takes place or takes deep roots in Afghanistan, what would be the future or political future of Afghanistan? Pakistan accepts the Kabul government. We accepted Kabul government even earlier. We would now accept the Kabul government. We believe in the electoral process. But how would Taliban, conceive, let's say, or take this elections that are taking place in Afghanistan at the moment? You just talked about the sporadic attacks, a lot of attacks on the day of election. There was a lot of violence, but still, the turnout was there, 20% turnout, low, but people came out. That is because people believe in democracy and people want to move on, because for the last 18, 19 years, Umar, they have seen this bloody war going on. They want peace and stability over there, but the credibility that the Kabul government is looking for, let's say all these five candidates, mainly five candidates who are looking for that kind of credibility and prestige, let's say, from their counterparts, would they see that happening in the future? That is the bigger question. For Pakistan, the most important thing is to have peace and stability, political stability in Afghanistan, because that is going to benefit the people of Afghanistan and to us. We want this thing, this war that is going on over there, to settle once and for all. We want peace and stability. Taliban talking to the Kabul government, let's say, or coming up with a solution to this whole issue that is going on. Presidential elections took place. This is very nice. This must go on. Democracy must go on over there. But also we want an end to the violence that is taking place almost every day. Because a layman, a common man, is suffering in Afghanistan, and the potential, huge potential that is there of Afghanistan and the region, economic potential that is there of the region. We cannot have that because we have Taliban, targeting innocent people over there. They challenge the democratic norms over there. So I think let's have this election, but sooner or later, Kabul government has to talk to the Taliban. And how would that go? That would be a question.
That would be, I think, a very huge question mark at this moment. Dr. Afridi, Taimur talked about credibility of the Kabul government and peace and stability in order for the government to move ahead, to prosper, to strengthen. And Pakistan has always believed in an Afghan-owned and an Afghan-led peace process. We have said that time and time again on different fora. What do you see? What is your prediction of what's going to happen in the next couple of months if the peace talks do not continue between the United States and the Taliban, or the Taliban and the Afghan government? Do you feel that elections or no elections, will a government remain stable in Afghanistan?
Of course, it's a really important question, and we have to see it from various angles. One, that is a peace deal between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. If it happens, which is now for the time being, if we see, unfortunately, it's not working. But if it happens, then of course, after that, even the Pakistan government has also stressed or asked the Afghan Taliban to sit with your own government and let's to settle your all issues, right? Even Afghan Taliban said that after a deal with United States, we can have negotiations with the Afghan government. But as far as your question is concerned, I mean that if there is the same debt process of negotiations earlier of this month when Donald Trump cancelled all this process. So what will happen? Of course, we can't expect something very good from this. Half that even there are so many political differences among the Afghans themselves on the one hand, and second, there are differences and even war between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan forces are largely what we can say the Afghan government. So it can't be, of course, we hope for the betterment, prosperity, and political stability of Afghanistan, but it's not very good fortune or what we can say for the future of Afghanistan. I mean that even this election, if there are attacks less in number, but since some people they died on the day of voting and polling in Afghanistan. So if even Abdullah or Ashraf Ghani or even other person become president of Afghanistan, so I think there will be no change of strategy or offensive from the Afghan Taliban. I think they will fight again with the Afghan government because they considered all the previous governments, especially the incumbent government of Afghanistan, is the puppet of the United States. So the same election commission is there, the same democratic setup is there, and on the same way, the election was held as was there in 2014. So then how can we expect some, betterment from the Afghan Taliban side? I don't think so. It is since the very first day, Afghan Taliban, they are not willing to have negotiations with the successive Afghan governments.
All right.
And a big hurdle has been created now by this halting of the peace process by the President Trump.
All right, Ambassador Durrani Sahab, two things: halting of the peace process and the negotiation between the Taliban and the Afghan government, or the lack thereof. Now, under the whole scenario that is happening and these elections that are happening for a fourth time, none of the government in Afghanistan has really been able to have that stronghold in Afghanistan as we speak, because they only kind of correspond to a certain minority of the whole Afghanistan, of the whole country, if we can speak. So what is the strategy, or what should happen if Abdullah, who claims to have won the first round of elections, or Ashraf Ghani Saab or Hikmat Yar Saab, he comes into power? What is going to happen? Is there going to be any change? Because that is what Dr. Afridi says. He doesn't see any change happening unless and until there are peace negotiations and that the Taliban talk with the government. What do you foresee?
You're right. I think you have raised very crucial questions. After President Trump, in fact, withdrew from the talks, there has been a level of uncertainty, and the hope that after the talks they'll head towards peace, and this has been a setback. And holding of elections was then questionable, that whether it would be held or not. But I think things were working in that direction. And maybe now, in retrospective effect, you can say that perhaps Americans also, while holding talks or giving the facade of having nearing to an agreement for peace, they wanted to hold these elections. And once these elections are held, and mind you that the number of casualties in these elections is far less than what we had witnessed during the 2014 elections. So this can be, termed as a success for the process. But this success, in fact, is also questionable, because Afghanistan's experiment with democracy is fairly new. It's just 18 years old. Before that, Afghanistan didn't have that experience of having adult franchise are based on free will. So this has been there. And then even now, when you talk about the previous 3 presidential elections, those presidents were actually paratrooped in Afghanistan. President Karzai, now he was not a leader of stature who could have been elected as president, but since he was the nominee of the Americans, so he got elected. Same was the case with President Ashraf Ghani. He didn't have the popular appeal in the country.
But Ambassador Durrani, how can you have a proper representation of the Afghan people until and unless you don't include the Taliban in the whole polling process?
Well, this is a challenge, and now a problem with the Taliban is that they don't believe in elections. Now it's quite a paradoxical as far as Afghan system of governance is concerned. I don't call it democracy. We are still struggling for democracy after 70 years of our existence. So Afghanistan is fairly new into this game, and it's a tribal society. It's a patriarchal society. So here
Do you feel, sir, that democracy as a system can or cannot work in a country like Afghanistan?
Democracy is it's a process. It is not like you're lighting electric bulb, switch on, switch off.
It is a slow and steady process.
And about democracy, it's said that more you practice, more you become democratic. So it comes with practice. And there'll be glitches, there'll be hurdles, there'll be setbacks.
So 18 years isn't enough in your point of
It's
view?
absolutely not enough. And especially when those were held, that process was initiated and nurtured under controlled conditions by the Americans with their money.
All right.
Even for the election, and the expenses of these elections are being paid by the Americans and the European Union. Same is the case with the Afghan armed forces. 90% of their expenses are being paid by the Americans. So Afghanistan's own, you can say, capability to hold elections or to sustain its armed forces are the very big challenges for the country.
All right. Taimur, very big challenges for Afghanistan. For a country that is very new to democracy, as Ambassador Durrani said, 18 years, 4 presidential elections, but more or less brought in by the Americans. Do you feel that a democratic system is one that can sustain itself in the long run in Afghanistan? That is the first part of my question. And the second part is, do you feel that Afghanistan as a country can economically stabilize itself in the absence of backing of the United States of America?
2 very crucial questions, almost certainly. But I would just continue from Mr. Durrani's point of view, that he said that Taliban don't believe in democracy. Of course they don't. And what they believe in is power sharing. So they believe in power, not democracy at the moment. And this is very interesting that they want to come into power, but they don't want to continue with the Western sort of democracy. Now, the thing is that even the tribal societies, they have their own kind of democracy. Democracy is a very wide debate. It's a big debate that you can continue for hours. Even the democracy that we have in the Western world, or even in the United States, they do have a debate on liberal and illiberal democracy. So democracy and this debate of democracy can
That's
go
a very
on.
interesting point.
But the thing is that democracy is taking roots in Afghanistan. Tribal people, they believe in democracy. People elect a Sardar, and the Sardar then represents the people on behalf of them, right? So this is a different kind of ball game in Afghanistan. How Afghanistan would experiment with democracy, let's see, and this would be, I think, very interesting, even an idea of research or point of research for the academics and for the political scholars and political scientists for that matter. Now, talking about peace talks with the Taliban, somehow I see the peace talks coming back. US would want to have peace talks with the Taliban.
Then why did they stall them?
Yes, this is the question. Taliban would want to have peace talks with the United States. I think the thing is that having elections and democratic process in Afghanistan was perhaps more important than having peace talks right away with the Taliban. What's the point of having
But
peace
what's
talks?
the point of
Let me
elections
just
if the
complete
Taliban do not want
Yes,
to contribute? in it?
That's the point, but let me complete my argument. My argument is that what's the point of fighting with the Taliban for this whole thing that the United States has been fighting for the last 18, 19 years? This war is going to enter in its 19th year. United States' longest war anywhere ever. So what's the point that you couldn't, introduce some kind of democratic system over there? Now we have these people who would be contesting elections. They contested elections, but can they continue with this kind of violence? Let's say Abdullah comes into power, after these elections, or Ghani, or Hekmatyar for that matter. Can they continue with this kind of violence from the Taliban side? Would they keep on fighting the Taliban for the next, let's say, 18, 19 years again? Is US ready for fighting the Taliban for the next 18, 19 years? Would NATO be willing to, spend in so much money and pour in money, dollars to fight the Taliban? I don't see that happening. US has to get out of Afghanistan. And
that was the election manifesto of Donald Trump.
Absolutely, and he has to make sure before he goes to his own presidential elections back in the United States. So they have to get over with this Afghan issue that is going on. So I see the peace talks coming back. So if peace talks come back, what would be the situation, let's say, or the position and status of the Kabul government in future? That is the bigger question. Would any of these presidential candidates becoming the president, would he accept the peace talks? How would they accept the peace talks? Would they share power with the Taliban? I think this is to be discussed, and this would be very interesting. I will just sum up my point. I see the peace talks coming back.
All right, you see the peace talks coming
Maybe
back?
in 5-6 months.
All right.
Know.
Dr. Afridi, now that the US has said it does not want to get involved in these peace talks, it might get involved again, as Taimu says. But that brings into play other regional actors like Russia. Russia that was itself involved a couple of decades back in the whole mess that happened in Afghanistan. And China, that the Taliban are looking towards as well as players for a future of talks. Do you see an importance of Russia and China as well as regional players for these currently stalled talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government for a future as far as peace process in Afghanistan is concerned?
That's very significant for both the Russian Federation and China. Of course, both these states, they have been involved in the peace process in one way or the other. For example, if you see, China is one of the 4 members in the QCG Quadrilateral Coordination Group on Afghanistan. On the other hand, Russia has, hosted 2 big conferences on Afghanistan issue where some 10-12 countries, they were the members of those conferences, and United States was only as an observer there from the US Embassy in Moscow. Even China is more interested. If we see, China also hosted the Heart of Asia conference in Beijing. So look to the China's huge investment in Afghanistan, especially the INEC Copper project and the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, where China wants to connect Central Asia with South Asia, and even the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, they can play a very crucial role in this regard. China and Russia, they are the founding members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And now India and Pakistan, they have also joined it as a full-fledged members. SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, has already made, a contact group on Afghanistan. So where, of course, the most powerful or the most important, what we can say, Russia and China, they are there. So both Russia and China, they can't ignore Afghanistan in any case. Central Asia, that is in the backyard of Russia. Central Asia shares common borders with Afghanistan from Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. And China, it shares common border with Afghanistan through Wuhan corridor. So there is the restio autonomous region of China, the Xinjiang or Xinjiang, right? So for all these reasons, of course, China and Russia, they are very much interested now in Afghanistan. And in coming future, of course, there are political security as well as economic stakes of these 2 states. Now, question is, if the US fails for these negotiations,
or doesn't want to participate
negotiations, then these states, Russia and China, they may fill the vacuum by, winning the sympathies of the people and having contact with the Afghan Taliban that leads to have some sharing formula with the neighboring states, with the help of the neighboring states of Afghanistan, of course, Pakistan or Iran or Turkey or some other states, Central Asian states, they may join it. But as much as the space of United States is there in Afghanistan, because United States is the initiator of the war on terrorism. United States attacked Afghanistan. United States ousted the Afghan Taliban from the government. So that's why Russia and China, they can't, take that space of the United States. So we hope, and I think that Trump administration will resume these talks with the Afghan Taliban.
All right.
But as far as the question of Russia and China is concerned, yes, they can play and they will increase their role in the absence of these talks between
right.
the Afghan Taliban and the United States. So their role can be increased in Afghanistan.
All right, but that is a huge question mark as well. There's the can or will. There's a huge difference whether they will or will they not, in fact. Now, Ambassador Durrani, 14,000 troops are currently there in Afghanistan, plus there are the NATO troops. All these, as you also pointed out some time back in the show, are funded by the US. But the election manifesto, when Donald Trump came into power, was that he wants all the troops to return to the United States of America. And the elections are in 2020. And he wants to kind of abide by what he said in the last elections. A, if he does that, will the United States of America still help Afghanistan economically? B, if they stop helping Afghanistan economically, and you remember that very important statement that came some time back, that if the US stops helping Afghanistan, they will not survive beyond 6 months' time. Who will step in at the place of the United States of America, and how much of interest will those countries or powers have in the absence of a United States backing of Afghanistan?
United States, when you talk about President Trump's own election manifesto, he in fact promised to withdraw the troops.
Yes.
And for him, being a businessman, it makes a bad business to be in Afghanistan and have to spend $45 to $50 billion per annum for nothing. You're losing face, and you're losing your own soldiers, you're losing your resources, and not getting anything in return. And I think that is still very much on his agenda. But the deep state in the United States prevailed for the time being. Most probably the Pentagon as well as the CIA. And of course, to some extent, the State Department.
They still want their presence in
They
Afghanistan.
wanted, yes, presence in Afghanistan, and then more say to Ashraf Ghani and all that. And of course, Ashraf Ghani also played a role, and there have been some external factors. You cannot avoid the spoiler's role played by India. It's possible. For Ashraf Ghani, the argument was that if United States withdraws, or if this peace deal is agreed to by America and the Taliban, most likelihood is that Afghan armed forces may join the Taliban. And that would be the total collapse of the system. So they didn't want the total collapse of the system. This is what the narrative goes, and this is what some commentators who are well informed have been talking about. So it is, and it's a serious affair, because no one would want that, say, if the peace agreement results in the collapse of the total system, and in that case, then when Taliban say that they will be ready to have intra-Afghan dialogue, so they'll accept others as junior partners. And this has been the fear of Ashraf Ghani government and other Afghan stakeholders, that when Taliban say that we'll hold intra-Afghan dialogue, after once the United States has given its withdrawal schedule, so for them it would be like accepting as a junior partner status with the Taliban. So these are the complexities, and these would continue for a while.
All right.
But I tend to agree with Taimur that President Trump is resolved to withdraw because he wants to tell the American public
That, look, I stand
that
by
I
my
have brought
words.
back the boys. This is what he wants, and I have saved $50 billion and all that. So.
But the question is again, how will Afghanistan survive economically?
Well, this is not just totally dependent to the United States. Of course, there will be some modus vivendi evolved once a peace agreement is signed and United States decides to withdraw. I think neighbors of Afghanistan, especially China, Russia, Iran, and Pakistan, they are the direct neighbors of Afghanistan. So they can, and then other countries of the Gulf region, they can also chip in. It's not that if the United States totally withdraws, but it's hoped that the United States, once it withdraws, it will not absolve of its responsibility towards Afghanistan. And there have been certain assurances from the United States that they will continue to assist economically to the future government in Afghanistan after they withdraw. And secondly, in terms of Afghan security forces, they intend continuing helping the Afghan security forces. So these have been the assurances given by the United States sides. But how it can sustain, how it will continue is yet to be seen, because once then we should keep our fingers crossed that this dialogue is resumed between the United States and the Taliban. And Prime Minister Imran Khan, during his visit to New York, he had told this to Ambassador Khalilzad that we would very much wish that these talks should be resumed, because herein lies the possibility of peace and stability in Afghanistan.
Talks equals peace and stability in Afghanistan. Now, as Ambassador Durrani pointed out, Prime Minister Imran Khan also talked to Zarmir Khalilzad, and Pakistan has been playing a role. How much, in your point of view, Taimur, because you've hosted many shows on the Afghan process as well and Afghanistan situation, how much important is the role, A, of Pakistan, and B, how much of interference will continue from the Indian side as well, in order to A, also create a kind of a proxy war against Pakistan through Afghanistan, and B, continue to have a certain presence in Afghanistan?
Umar, I would say this is a very difficult question, Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, having better relations, and Indian interference. But before that, just one point that I would like to make, that Umar, Afghanistan's biggest issue is not economy. It's massive, rampant corruption over there. For the last 19 years, these people in Afghanistan, the politicians, they have not done anything to strengthen the institutions over there in Afghanistan. They have been taking massive money from the United States. We have been helping them out. We have on many points we have went out of the way, extra mile, to improve our relations with Afghanistan. But guess what? What is going on in Afghanistan is that
you remember the blow hot, blow cold relationship that we've had with them.
Absolutely, and look at the way Khalilzad and before him, Holbrooke and other people, Hillary Clinton for that matter, Alice Wells recently, they have been visiting Afghanistan, talking to the political parties over there, these political figures over there. But as you were discussing about the economy and who would do what and who can do what in Afghanistan, I think Afghanistan, or any other country in the region for that matter, should be self-reliant when it comes to economy.
But for a country like Afghanistan to be self-reliant is not an easy task.
That is possible. The thing is that, because just look at the reporting done by the New York Times. Mujib Mashal has done excellent reporting on the massive corruption over there. New York Times correspondent in Afghanistan. The reports he has written about the massive corruption. Afghanistan's biggest strength is its geography, connected to Central Asia, and on the other side to Pakistan and South Asia. they can do wonders. We can do wonders. And I think that is what Pakistan has been talking with Afghanistan. You asked about what can we do? Or
Also
what,
through the
what should be our
CPEC or the
approach?
BRI, China can get
Absolutely.
involved.
You know, but the thing is that, let's say US would come in, China would come in, or Pakistan would come in. The bigger issue is massive corruption. That needs to go away, and
Alright.
a strong political system inside Afghanistan. Then we can move on. But these are the issues of, frankly speaking, Umar, we also have these issues. All the countries in the region have this issue. Rather, all the countries in the world have this issue of corruption. But Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan, the representatives of the people of Afghanistan have to now think that they have to be, you know, self-reliant when it comes to economy, and they can do wonders. I'm sure they have huge potential. Coming to the Pakistan's role or Pakistan's approach to with Afghanistan, towards Afghanistan, our policy, Umar, recently our Prime Minister Imran Khan, before going to United Nations, he opened a 24/7 trade route with Afghanistan, especially on the Torkham border, on the all the borders, especially on the Torkham border. That is because we realize that there's a huge potential for trade with Afghanistan. We can explore many areas. We have security concerns, of course, but we can address them mutually. We have a common foe. We have a common enemy, that is extremism and terrorism. We can address that issue as well. We can give them access to India, and we can make sure that their goods reach India safely. But talking about, let's say, India's role in Afghanistan, that's the point that we have with Afghanistan. You know, our trade with them, our support to their political system, our support to the Afghan people. Umar, but just before making the Indian point, Pakistan gives 3,000 scholarships every year to the Afghan students. That is an excellent initiative. We have recently opened a Pakistan-Afghanistan Dosti Hospital at Torkham border. It's an excellent, I would say, idea to open a hospital over there, because a lot of people from Afghanistan come to Pakistan for medical reasons, for medical treatment, and I think we should step up our efforts in improving our services to the people of Afghanistan. This is our goodwill to the people of Afghanistan, and we should strengthen it. So opening
Is it appreciated
a
by the
hospital over
Afghan
there.
people?
We opened Muhammad Ali Jinnah Hospital in Kabul recently, few weeks back, I believe, a few weeks back. This is an excellent initiative. So we have been, let's say, the direct and indirect victim of the war, of a war on terror that has been going on over there. But at the same time, we also share common concerns. You know, we have the common concerns, and we can address that.
We have housed the largest number of immigrants from Afghanistan.
Absolutely, excellent point. Refugees have been here in Pakistan, but Umar, addressing the refugee crisis, I think every refugee who is in Pakistan or who would be going back to Afghanistan, he is our goodwill ambassador. We have to treat them well. We have to send them back if they want to go back with respect, a lot of respect for them, and we should be helping them out, even back in Afghanistan, if we can manage it. And I think Pakistan has been doing that recently. So this is because we want to have better relations with Afghanistan. Talking about India, I think India was the only country which felt left out of Afghanistan recently. Quadrilateral group meeting, Pakistan, China, United States, Afghanistan, they have been meeting and discussing about peace and stability over there. Afghanistan has been discussing this issue. Taliban and the other political factions from Afghanistan, they have been visiting Moscow for that matter, China, Iran, all the countries. India left out. And I see, Umar, India as a spoiler in this whole game. They're up to no good for sure. And I think India needs to clarify its position in Afghanistan. And by the way, this is not they aren't new over there. They have been there since 60s and 70s. They have been even, having their lot of connections with Afghanistan. The Afghan politicians and people have been going to India recently. But we don't have any issue with that if Afghanistan is improving its relations with India. But it should not be at the cost of its relations with Pakistan or on Pakistan's security cost, So Pakistan is very clear. Our approach is very pragmatic, and it should stay pragmatic.
All right. Dr. Afridi, I'm kind of slightly deviating from what we've been talking about. Representation of the Afghan people comes out through elections. But when the representation is very small, I mean, when hardly 20%, these are the official figures, but as per Ambassador Durrani, the real figures are even lesser than that. If the figures are so small, how do you feel whosoever comes as the new president of Afghanistan, can he be a real representative of the Afghan people? Will the Afghan people in the long run accept them? Leave aside the Taliban angle and the Taliban context, who they claim are in a majority in Afghanistan. What about the people in Afghanistan?
I think if we talk about the reasons of this low turnout in the Afghan presidential election, so this is one thing is that democracy has not been established in Afghanistan, and it is a process, especially if we see in developing countries a slow process where you have to move on a long road and then you can establish your institutions.
But can
And-
Afghanistan afford to go slow on this process?
Yes. And second, especially in Afghanistan in the last 18 years, if we see, so there is bloodshed. This is a war-torn country for the last 40 years, and especially in last 18 years, so there is continuing war. In this situation, if the Afghan people, even if it is the low turnout, but at least if they go for voting and they cast their votes, so it is a kind of success, what we can say.
All right.
On the other hand, regarding your question, that whether if there will be anyone, the new
Yes.
president of Afghanistan, so the real representative of people, we can call him or not. I think this is the problem of democracy across the world, right? It is not only concerned to Asia or particularly to Afghanistan. It is everywhere, right? If there are some 8, 9, or 10 candidates in a parliamentary election, if there is premier, prime minister, or a presidential election in any XYZ country of the world. So if one candidate gets 30% and the rest they get 70%, so the 30%, is declared as the victorious and successful in the election run. He can't or she can't represent the entire nation. Same is the case with Afghanistan. Of course, in real sense, we can't say that he will be the real representative, but at least through democratic process which have been held, and even if 5% of people, just suppose, if they cast their vote, which is now about 20%, then the people they polled, it means that yes, he can be a representative of the Afghan nation and Afghan people. But I think the Afghan nation is not very much aware with that of the democratic process or democratic
Or what
institutions.
the real essence of democracy means.
Essence of democracy, yes, that is lacking in Afghanistan. And one important factor there in Afghanistan, that is the ethnic divide, right? So people they don't cast vote, I think so, from the spirit of democracy. Rather they see that whether he is Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, Turkmen, or whatever in Afghanistan.
All right. All right. In this whole situation of ethnic divide, Ambassador Durrani, and the low turnout, but of course progress as far as the democratic process is concerned in a country like Afghanistan, how do you see, this is my last question to all three of you, amongst the three options to move beyond this current pause in the peace negotiations? A, unilateral US troop withdrawal. B, maintain status quo indefinitely. C, returning to the negotiating table. Which of the option will work and can be the more credible in the days to come for peace and stability in Afghanistan under a new government and under a new president? I'm asking all three of you this last question.
I think it would be for the United States to withdraw unilaterally. They would not want this option because then that would create a bad taste, not only for the United States but also its credibility
All right.
in the world. And it's already being criticized for that. Like it withdrew from the nuclear agreement with Iran. So there, I think United States credibility has received a big beating. So they should avoid. They'll avoid. A negotiated settlement is the key,
All right.
and everyone agrees. Even in the United States, those who were not in favor of having only dialogue with the Taliban, they wanted to have intra-Afghan dialogue. They have also realized that there has to be some kind of a negotiated settlement. Some kind, I use the word deliberately, because
That could take any form in the days and the weeks to
yes.
come. But there needs to be a kind of a negotiated settlement in
it
your
has
point
to
of
be, because otherwise then we cannot
right.
talk about peace and stability
All right.
returning
Taimur.
to Afghanistan.
Umar, I think I would agree with Mr. Durrani that Taliban too are fed up, Umar. They want peace and stability over there, because I think even after President Trump called off the deal, Taliban have been quoted saying that they want the peace talks back, and they're still willing, and they would want that because the people of Afghanistan are also fed up. They cannot continue with this kind of violence forever. Taliban cannot continue. Also keeping in mind that Taliban too have a new generation. Young people, even in the Taliban cadre, they want peace and stability. And Taliban have also tested, the outside world, dealing with other countries, going to Beijing, Tehran, United States for that matter, dealing with them, going to Qatar, dealing with Pakistan as well. So I think the overall mood has changed in Afghanistan, and let's hope that peace returns to Afghanistan.
All right, Dr. Afridi.
Unilateral withdrawal is not the solution, because it will leave the things unsettled. Second, status quo, but for how long? So I think the only solution, and it is most likely that negotiations and the peace process between the Afghan Taliban and the US administration, after that between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government, it will work.
All right. Thank you very much to all three of my guests, Ambassador Asif Durrani, Taimur Shamil, and Dr. Manzoor Afridi. Ladies and gentlemen, the Afghan elections, the fourth presidential elections in Afghanistan, have taken place, and in a couple of weeks we'll know who becomes the new president. But what is important, whosoever becomes the president, is that the peace talks between Afghanistan and the United States that have been stalled restart, and the Taliban and all the other factions are taken into consideration, and they come together to talk, because at the end of the day, for peace in Afghanistan, for peace in the entire region, there needs to be intra-Afghan dialogue, and there needs to be that dialogue between the US and the Afghan people and the different factions in Afghanistan. Allah Hafiz.